Welcome to the September Accessibility Talk. Each month we invite a speaker to present an accessibility topic, and afterward we invite the community to ask questions and participate in discussion. And just so everyone knows, this is being recorded. If you have a question for our speaker, please post it in the Zoom chat window or in Twitter with the hashtag A11yTalks. That's spelled A11yTalks. If you're a regular around here, you can see that I am a new face. I am today's host, Amy June Heinlein, the Drupal community lead for Hook 42. Our speaker is Sarbbottam. He has been a front-end engineer for 14 years and is currently working with LinkedIn's core accessibility team. In this month's talk, Love Thy Keyboard, he will speak to why keyboard accessibility is so crucial. The presentation will share the trade-offs of using semantic versus non-semantic markup with an everyday example, and how to manage and guide focus. It's a presentation emphasizing the various aspects of keyboard accessibility, and he'll conclude with a brief introduction to WAI-ARIA. So, without further ado, I'm going to hand the discussion over to Sarbbottam.
Thank you, Amy. That has been a great introduction. I would just like to make a small correction to that one. I was part of LinkedIn's core accessibility team, but I currently work for LinkedIn Enterprise. So let me share my screen and hopefully that will be. So let me know if my screen is visible and I can start.
We can see it.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. And thank you, Amy, for the great introduction. So today, okay, let me see. Okay, now this is working. First of all, thank you all for joining. And today I'll be talking about keyboard accessibility, why it is important, what are the most common issues faced by keyboard-only users, and how we can make web applications keyboard accessible. But let me take a quick moment to reintroduce myself and share a quick timeline about my experience with accessibility. As Amy already shared, my name is Sarbbottam Bandyopadhyay. I'm a front-end engineer at LinkedIn. I've been developing web applications, specifically web applications, since 2006. It's the same year when jQuery was released. I wish I knew about it. Life would have been a little easier. I got introduced to digital accessibility for the first time when I was contracting for British Telecom in 2007. It was an internal exhibition at BT Belfast. I wish I learned more about it, but I didn't really get much of accessibility at that point of time, till 2011. That's the time when my formal introduction to web accessibility happened as a part of the onboarding process when I joined Yahoo. In 2013, I came across a presentation by Léonie Watson titled Design Like You Give a Damn, Practical Accessibility for Web Pros. And that was the moment that was the moment of truth for me when I realized the criticality of digital accessibility. Since then, I tried my best to make all the web applications that I have developed to be accessible. I re-emphasize that I tried my best because of my limited knowledge. And I would highly recommend watching this presentation. If you haven't, it is available on YouTube. In the same year, I presented at YUI-Conf about accessibility along with Ted Drake. You probably be aware of Ted Drake. He's very well known in the community, one of the accessibility leaders. In 2016, I joined LinkedIn's core accessibility team, and I learned most of accessibility during my 1.5-year tenure with the team. And thanks to Jennison, again, you probably know about Jennison Assumption. He's a well-known leader in accessibility. I worked under his guidance. And without any further ado, let's move on with our today's topic. But before I dive into keyboard accessibility, I think I should talk about web content accessibility guidelines. It is a set of recommendations to make web content accessible. It's often referred as WCAG or WCAG, and the current version is 2.0. And I think pretty soon it will be known as Accessibility Guidelines, if I'm not mistaken. In short, it will be AG. I think it will cater to all the digital accessibility. WCAG is a set of guidelines which are associated with testable success criteria which are based upon 4 key principles. In order to be accessible, a UI must be perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. These are often referred as POUR. Let's take a look at these principles a bit more closely. So, perceivable, by definition, it says the information and the user interface components must be presentable to the user in a way they can perceive. Or maybe in other words, like information must be presented in more than one senses. For example, we often see on input error, the corresponding field is outlined red, indicating that this needs to be corrected. But a user with color blindness or blindness cannot perceive this information and this indication. We must also provide a text message describing the scenario. Similarly, closed caption and audio description serve similar purpose for videos. Operable, can a user operate in user interface? Like, is there enough time to react? Like, can the controls be reachable? Can the controls be acted easily? For example, if you see this model, this is from the NPS website, National Park website. I was trying to reserve an online booking. And then this model came up, like it was trying to suggest me that within certain time, I'll be navigated to a different page, which has a different cookie policy than NPS. And if you notice, the countdown started from 7 seconds. And at least to me, like this 7 seconds is not enough to read the whole content. If I'm visiting this page over and over again, maybe 7 seconds would be good enough, but not for the first time. So probably we need to be more careful about the situations and how we can handle it easily. The next one is understandable. Is the information and the operation of the user interface understandable? For example, is it readable? Do we have enough font size? Is the font size large enough? Do we have enough color contrast? Is there enough letter and line spacing? So here is a quick video which simulates like if there are too much of text and not enough spacing, how a dyslexic person might experience it. Last but not the least of the 4 principles is robust. The content must be robust enough that it can be interpreted reliably by a wide variety of user agents, including assistive technologies. And when you talk about user agent, most of the time we refer them as browsers because they are the most used user agent. So if any of these criteria or principles are not true, users with disabilities will not be able to access the user interface. Here's a screenshot of web content accessibility guidelines. It's a draft version. As you can see that I couldn't take the whole screenshot. Like Chrome didn't allow me to take the whole screenshot and Firefox hanged. It could be overwhelming. And when I tried to print it in a PDF, it's like 29 pages. And I had the similar overwhelmingness when I first saw this page. And I think sometimes people feel accessibility is so hard because it is so much of content that we have to adhere to. I feel web content accessibility guidelines quick reference has done a great job in categorizing all these success criteria with respect to POUR and making it less overwhelming. I would highly recommend this. Like if you're starting with accessibility, probably you know about it if you're into accessibility, but if you're starting with web accessibility, this is a great place to start. Keyboard accessibility, it belongs to the operability criteria of the POUR principle. Many users with motor disabilities rely on keyboard. Like accessing a pointing device or a mouse takes a lot of fine control. Like when I switch systems, I struggle to get used to the new mouse or new trackpad. And that's sometimes true. That's most of the time true for people with most motor disabilities. And thus they rely on keyboard, which is pretty much consistent across the globe. Also, many assistive devices emulate the keyboard. For example, if it is a screen reader, they use the keyboard for interacting with the user interface. So if an application is not keyboard accessible, it is largely not accessible. and it's going to impact the highest number of users, making keyboard accessibility one of the most important need of digital accessibility. In order to be keyboard accessible, a user interface must be navigable and operable using keyboard. For navigation, tab and arrow keys are primarily used, and to operate, enter and space are used primarily. So this video demos the tab navigation and the arrow navigation. You can find that the user interface reacts to the tab and the arrow press. The symbol corresponding to the key press is visible at the bottom left corner of the screen. So tab is primarily used for forward navigation, and shift tab is used for backward navigation. Arrows are primarily used for widgets or maybe groups, like for example, radio groups or drop-down options. And in this video, we can see the enter and the space key in action. Once again, you can see the symbol corresponding to the key press at the bottom left of the screen. And you can notice that the follow button is reacting to the enter and the space press and updating its states accordingly. There are many ways a web application can introduce difficulties for a user who rely on keyboard. Few of the most common issues are mouse-only interaction, lack of focus indicators, non-deterministic tab navigation, insufficient tab navigation, to name few. Let's look at these issues in a little more detail. So mouse-only interaction is an interaction when certain functionality can only be performed using a mouse or a pointing device and by no other means. And this video demos the mouse-only interaction. The mode drop-down appears only on mouse over, and there is no way a keyboard user can reach and operate this control. So we must ensure that every interaction must also be performable using keyboard alone to avoid mouse-only interaction. Moving on to focus indicator, I believe, to me, like, focus indicator is the most important criteria for keyboard accessibility. Focus indicator visually identifies what is the current active element on the screen. Without a focus indicator, for a sighted user, there is no clue what is the current active element. And without the knowledge of current active element, a sighted keyboard-only user can neither navigate nor operate. I feel focus indicator for a sighted user is equivalent to mouse pointer for a mouse user. Often, the focus highlight is suppressed using CSS. You might have seen similar styles on the page, like where focus outline is none. Using this, the focus indicator is suppressed and there is no visual indication. Imagine you're accessing a web page or a digital interface using a mouse, but no mouse pointer is displayed on the screen. If you find it hard to imagine, try adding cursor none to all the elements of the web page and then accessing it. So this video demos the no mouse pointer scenario. Without the mouse pointer, this UI is practically inaccessible for me using a mouse. When there is no focus indicator, a keyboard-only user experiences the same. So for example, this video, if you see that I'm pressing the tab key, and probably the UI is reacting to this tab press, but I have no clue what is the current active element. So I'm using a Chrome extension to force focus highlight on the current active element on this page. The Chrome extension that I used is called Focus Indicator, developed by me. And I developed it for myself, and I didn't know that many people will use it. But as you can see, like more than 1,800 people are currently using it. So we definitely have this problem with Focus Indicator, and we should avoid it. As I said earlier, like, the focus indicator is equivalent to mouse pointer. So focus outline none, that style is also equivalent to cursor none. And if we do not have cursor none in our style sheet, probably we should not have focus outline none too. But it is worth noting that there could be situation when the default focus highlight might not be helpful, probably due to the similar background color or lack of available space. In such scenario, we must provide a custom visual clue to ensure that the current active element is visually identifiable. Sometimes we might want to, or we might get tempted to hide the default focus indicator because every browser has their own way to present it. Even if we do that for the sake of consistency, we must ensure that we replace it with something consistent and a custom visual clue. Moving on to tab navigation, a deterministic tab navigation is highly desired. As shared earlier, like the keyboard users rely heavily on the tab key to navigate to the interactive elements. The order in which these interactive elements or the focusable elements receives focus is known as tab order. It is expected that tab press will focus the next visible focusable element in the logical order. Or in other words, the tab order must be in sync with the visual order. So here's a quick video about the same. Consider the tab navigation, like as I'm pressing tab, it is focusing the next visible elements in the logical visual ordering. However, in this video, the tab navigation is non-deterministic. As you can see that I expected something else to be focused and it focused something else, leading to a cognitive overhead as it did not match my and user's expectation. So if we want to have deterministic tab navigation, we must avoid positive tab indexes and CSS to change the visual order. Oftentimes we used a float, and the way float works, or flex order, which is pretty new thing, it changes the visual order but not the DOM order. So if we want a deterministic tab navigation, we must rely on the DOM order for the visual and the tab order. Also, talking about tab navigation, I feel obliged to talk about the mighty event.prevent default. As the API name suggests, like it prevents the default behavior. So if event.prevent default is used in a key down or in a keyboard event handler without any check, it will break the tab navigation, as tab press will also get prevented. A keyboard only user will not be able to navigate any further, resulting in tab trap. We could mitigate this by either focusing a desired node at the end of the operation, or preventing the default behavior, or not preventing the default behavior when tab key is pressed, or preventing the default behavior only for desired keys. In this example, like the default behavior is prevented only when up and down arrow keys are pressed. So we must ensure not to trap the tab press for a successful keyboard navigation. The last issue that I would like to talk about is insufficient tab navigation. It's very common in dynamic web applications. A keyboard user expects that the actionable elements in a dynamic updated UI can be navigated by subsequent tab press. Often that's not the case. Consider this video, like when I activate the profile icon, a modal is displayed, but there is no way I can reach to these interactive elements of this modal by subsequent tab press. The subsequent tab presses is still focusing the focusable elements at the background. Fortunately, it's relatively easy to avoid these issues and these common pitfalls if we follow the fundamentals. The first and foremost fundamentals is semantic HTML. I'm sure you all know what semantic HTML is, but here is a quick refresher. So using h1 to h6 tags for heading, using ahref for link, using button for button, and so on. Semantic HTML allows the markup to be system interpretable or machine interpretable or software interpretable, however you would like to call it, so that it can be presented meaningfully in other means. For example, here is a screenshot of Semantic HTML Wikipedia page with voiceover rotor currently presenting all the headings available in this content, in this document. And using this interface, a voiceover user can quickly navigate to the desired heading. These headings could only be generated because of the appropriate heading tags usage in the document. So I just use voiceover in this example, but this is true for other screen reading software like JAWS or NVIDIA. Semantic HTML is not only important for accessibility, but also for search engine optimization. So in this screenshot, Bing is utilizing the semantic structure of the document to provide a glimpse of the contents. Not all search engines display results in similar fashion, but they do rely on the semantic clarity to index the results. Semantic HTML is often overlooked and it needs more loved. So using semantic HTML, we could achieve accessible user interface with less code than non-semantic markup. Let's take a look at a very minimalistic example. So a control which looks like a button and alerts hello there when that control is activated. So for the markup, let's start with the most used unsemantic element for this use case, a div. And for the script, there is a function named greet, which alerts hello there. And this function is attached as a click handler to this div. On clicking this control, which looks like a button, by the way, the desired alert message is displayed. So this is great, this is functional. But this control is not reachable via keyboard, resulting in mouse-only interaction, the first issue that we discussed about. It's due to div. Div is a non-focusable element, and any non-focusable elements cannot be reached by keyboard, using keyboard by default. So tab index 0 to the rescue. Tab index 0 makes any element focusable and inserts it in the natural tab order. So now this control is reachable by pressing tab, but there is a problem. It does not react to enter and space press, which is the expectation of a keyboard-only user. So we can add a key down handler to address this issue. So a function named kd handler is attached as a key down handler to this div. And this kd handler function invokes the greet function if space or enter is pressed. So now this control is keyboard accessible. It is reachable as well as operable using keyboard alone. But we can't call this control a button yet. A screen reader does not consider it as a button. So Aria to the rescue. We can add a role equals button. Adding role equals button lets a screen reader interpret it as a button. And finally, we can call this control a button. But using a button would have resulted in less code. The markup is now a button with the text greet. And we have the same greet function added as the click handler. And that's all. No need for tab index 0, as button is a focusable element by default. No need for role equals button, because button is a button and we don't have to explicitly call it as a button. And also, probably this is the icing of the cake, that we don't need the explicit key down handler. The click handler gets executed when space or enter is pressed. So this is a screenshot of a code pen comparing all the discussed scenarios and the use cases so far. You probably might be wondering, like, why are we talking about such fundamentals? Are we really not aligned with these fundamentals? Unfortunately, the answer is negative. Even though we are aware of these fundamentals, we often forget about it like searching for role equals button at public www.com displays a tons of results. For the sake of time, let's look at two such examples in detail. Note the markup in this screenshot. It's a div. And the irony is it's a promotional post about a book on accessibility. And the markup in this screenshot is a span, and you can see it is using similar things like tab index 0 and Aria Attributes. This is one of the most popular web email interface. I hope this is evident that semantic HTML needs more love. But semantic HTML might not be enough to convey the semantics of rich widgets or rich UI. For example, custom dropdown, accordion, type ahead, and so on. There are no corresponding single native HTML elements for these use cases. Rather, these widgets, the UIs, are composed of several semantic HTML elements. So Aria addresses this gap. Aria, or WAI-ARIA, Web Accessibility Initiative, Accessible Rich Internet Application, is a set of additional HTML elements which enhances the accessibility of web content by providing extra information. Primarily, there are three categories of Aria attributes, namely role, state, and property. So role defines what an element is or what it does. For example, role equals menu suggests that there is a list of choices available. And talking about role equals menu, I just came across this post yesterday. This is published 2 days before. That we should probably avoid using Aria menu. It's a very interesting read. I would definitely recommend it. Like, you can search for Aria menus written by Marco, and you'll probably land up in this article. Moving on, a state conveys the current state of an element. For example, a pop-up menu is currently expanded. The input provided by the user is invalid. And property, it adds additional information to an element, like relationship. An example of property would be Aria described by, Aria controls, Aria owns, and so on. So Aria described by could be used as to provide certain hint messages. Aria controls and Aria owns are used in complex widgets where the DOM structure doesn't follow each other, and so on. But it's worth noting that the semantic information provided by Aria attributes supersedes the native HTML semantic. So for example, a button with a role link will be considered as a link and not as a button. Thus, the first rule of Aria is not to use Aria if we can use native HTML. So it would be wiser to use a href instead of role equals link. The next fundamental that I would like to talk about is focus management. Let's revisit the inefficient tab navigation video. On activating the profile icon, a modal is displayed, but there is no way a keyboard-only user can interact with this modal immediately and easily. Subsequent tab presses do not focus the focusable and operable elements in this modal. So it could have been avoided by managing focus. To avoid inefficient tab navigation, the HTML element corresponding to the dynamic section needs to be focused programmatically. For example, the modal, probably there is a div which is containing that modal, so that div needed to be focused. So a focusable HTML element can be focused by JavaScript using invoking the focus method on it. However, if that HTML element is a non-focusable one, like div, or tab index -1 attribute is needed, tab index -1 attribute makes any element focusable via only JavaScript, and it takes out from the natural tab order. Focusing a container programmatically serves as a guided context switch. What do I mean by guided context switch is like any subsequent tab press will focus the next focusable element within or after this context, which enhances a keyboard user's experience. Consider the new tweet interaction in this video. The input area is focused when the new tweet modal is displayed, and next tab press focuses the emoji picker button, and so on, allowing a very convenient and easy keyboard navigation. I call this guided focus management. I just made up this term. I'm not sure if everyone calls this. Not only it enhances a keyboard user's experience, but it also allows the screen reader to read out the textual content of the focused container, letting a visually challenged user to be aware of the UI updates. So dynamic web applications can largely benefit from guided focus management, especially single page applications, page and route transitions. So the next slide will be a video. I'm not sure if the audio will be very clear, but you can still see that, you can still perceive that the screen reader is reading out the content, because at the bottom of the screen, there will be also a visual indication, bottom left corner of the screen, that the screen reader is trying to read out this content. So let's visit this video.
Visited, link, feed, links menu, link, skip to main content, link, accessibility feedback, visited, link, feed, visited, link, home, visited, link, my network, visited, link, my network. You are currently on a link. To click this link, press Control, Option, Space, Advertisement. Your 184 connections sorrow Bandyopadhyay literos. No hashtags. Once you follow hashtags, you will see them. Here your contact import is ready. Connect with your contacts. And links menu, link, skip to main content, link, accessibility feedback, visited, link, feed, visited, link, feed. You are currently on a link. To click this link, press Control, Option, Space. Show Launchpad Cards, Sarbbottam, prepare for a career opportunity with free steps. Advertisement, premium, Sarbbottam Bandyopadhyay, link, image, Sarbbottam Bandyopadhyay, link, see all premium features.
So in this video, I was accessing LinkedIn.com using VoiceOver. And as you can, you probably have noticed that when I switched between different routes, that's a feed and my network, the UI got updated and VoiceOver was reading out the textual content of the updated UI. So guided focus management can be very useful. But there are situations when we cannot shift the focus from the current context. For example, a type ahead, the focus type ahead or autocomplete. The focus needs to remain in the search input. Once again, Aria to the rescue. In search scenario, we can use Aria to provide a spoken feedback, and we can programmatically highlight the desired option to provide a visual feedback to the keyboard user. So let's look at this example once again. This is another video. So I'll be accessing this type ahead using VoiceOver, and you can notice that the focus always remains in the search box. Even then, the options will be highlighted, the desired options will be highlighted, and spoken feedback will be provided when up and down arrow are being pressed.
VoiceOver on Safari, localhost colon 8080, window, Wikipedia search as keyboard focus. S, notifications available. Use up the down keys and navigate followed by enter select. S, no suggestions available. S-A-N, notifications available. San Marino, San Francisco, X, San Francisco.
So for the spoken feedback, the credit goes to Aria Live Region and Aria Active Descendant. I really feel very excited when I talk about accessibility, but I wanted to ensure that the content of this presentation is very crisp and concise and catering to a very specific need and not to overwhelm you. So I believe this is the time for me to pause and open up for any questions if there are any. But before I pause, if I could summarize this presentation in 2 sentences, they would be: get romantic with semantic and focus on focusing. An accessible user interface is always a better user interface. I hope now onwards, all the UI that you would develop, you will try to make them accessible, or rather they will be accessible. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for listening, and thank you Accessibility Talks and Amy for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. So does anyone have any questions or points of discussion they have for the speaker today? I have a couple, if I can start with while other people are thinking of some. So how do you convince stakeholders and or designers? How do you deal with techniques for designer and stakeholder pushback?
I would, as I talked about the mouse only interaction, I would actually go and make cursor none to the website, and I'll let a designer access that with only mouse. So many times designers come up with an interaction, which is a very well-known interaction like hover card. You might have seen it, like there will be a small question mark, and so that we can take the mouse over there and a small pop-up menu comes up which gives a brief introduction about it. And that's the problem, like we cannot reach it with keyboard. So I'll try to ensure like I hide all the mouse pointer from the UI and the designer to access it, and probably they will understand. On the contrary, just to take a little moment, I feel like it's not the pushback, but it's the ignorance. Most of the time people don't understand what is accessibility and what is the need because they haven't experienced it or they haven't seen other people experiencing it. So I would definitely encourage the other people who know about accessibility to make the people who doesn't know about accessibility be aware of it, and probably let them be aware of certain devices like head mouse or screen reader, how they behave. And I think they will understand, and they're all smart people. They will have empathy and they will not try to push back any further.
Right. Okay, so we have the question, what are your thoughts on input masking?
Could you say a little more about that? What do we mean by input masking?
I don't know what they mean by input masking. Do you want to elaborate on that question? For example, phone number formatting as you type.
I think so. Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. I personally think if we can speak out about it, it is very helpful, like if we have implemented it correctly. But very rarely I have come across such kind of input masking. And when I was part of Yahoo, like we had to do these things, and there are certain solutions available in the community, but none of them cater to my needs. So I also created a utility called Auto Formatter. It was also published from Yahoo's GitHub repo as a BSD license. And later on, I updated it to be much more efficient. There are some flaws, as I told you, like I tried my level best to make things accessible, but maybe not always I did it in the correct manner. So I feel this can be very useful if it is done properly. Providing that we don't make users' life miserable when we are trying to be intelligent and inserts the different delimiter and changing the cursor position and the text position out there. If we can do it nicely, I think this is a very good, it could be very effective.
Okay. And Carrie asked, what screen readers are best for keyboard testing?
In this question, I'd like to differ a little bit. For keyboard testing, we should not even try to rely on screen reader. We should just use keyboard, and everyone has keyboard. we should rely on few of the primary keys like the tab keys, the arrow keys, the spacebar, and the enter, and see if it is working. Many times applications will be providing keyboard shortcuts, like if you go to Twitter or YouTube, and if you press a shift question mark, you can see a modal which will be displayed, which has a lot of keyboard shortcuts, and we can try them. But and moving on to screen reader, that's another layer on top of keyboard accessibility. So if it was not keyboard accessible, probably it is not screen reader accessible, because the screen reader users will also primarily use these keys along with certain specialized keys. Like if somebody is using JAWS, they can use keyboard shortcuts like H or L to bring up the sets of headings, sets of links. If somebody is using VoiceOver, they can use the VoiceOver rotor to bring up this hotspot, the wave spot. But I would still emphasize on testing it via keyboard first, even before trying out screen reader. And just to add on to this question, JAWS is a paid software, so you probably need to pay for it. And VoiceOver comes for free in Mac. And also NVIDIA is a free software, but if you're using it, you probably would like to donate something to NVIDIA, because the folks are trying hard to make it great. But either of them works.
Right. So what are some of the most forgotten issues that teams forget to think about when they're testing, or that they just leave out completely?
The one which I said, the four of the most common issues with keyboard accessibility, like they try to make the user interface pretty, and they think that the focus indicator is not pretty, and they remove it by breaking the keyboard accessibility completely. We have mouse only interaction, which we often forget. We try to have things like a shortcut. One of the issue which I have experienced recently with keyboard accessibility is the usage of ellipses. So we often use 3 dots, ellipses through the CSS to truncate a content. And by doing so, that content is truncated by CSS, so that content is still available for a screen reader user. Sometimes we add a title and a pop-up on top of that content, so it is also available for a mouse-only user. But that content is not reachable, and it doesn't have any other operability. So for a keyboard user, I often struggle with that there is no way I can perceive what that content is. So this ellipsis, if you go back to history, like this has come from the print media, and it had a definitive need and definitive use case out there. So the ellipses are deliberate in the print media. But when we are talking about digital media, we have so many form factors, going back to robust again. We have no guarantee where that ellipses will be provided, and will probably break the readability of the users. And these are the few of the most common issues that which we often forget when we are trying to design.
Does anybody have any other questions? Okay, well, thank you for coming out today. I really appreciate you accepting the invitation. Now, remember everyone, this is recorded, so if you want to come back and rewatch it, and if you are watching it on YouTube, you can still continue the conversation by using the hashtag #AliTalks on Twitter. That's A11yTalks. The links mentioned in the presentation will be available on the YouTube video when it's posted, and then we'll have a chat transcription as well. So just remember to join us next month when we talk about more things accessible. And like I said, thanks again for presenting today, Sarbbottam.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for listening, and thank you, Amy, for this opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you.